My high society in-laws thought I was a broke software engineer, so we faked poverty to get their approval. But then an assassin showed up at the door looking for my secret offshore assets. The air in our cramped one-bedroom apartment always seemed thick, a mixture of old pizza boxes and the faint metallic scent of my own anxiety. I was a software engineer, making a decent living by most standards. But when it came to my wife, Sarah, and her family, decent might as well have been destitute. Sarah's parents, the Hollands, were old money, the kind that didn't just have generational wealth, they were the wealth. Mr. Holland, a retired investment banker, viewed anyone earning under 6 figures as a charming yet ultimately disposable charity case. Sarah knew this. She'd spent her entire adult life navigating their frosty, judgmental atmosphere, always trying to buffer me from the worst of it. "They're coming for the weekend, Mark," she'd announced one Tuesday, staring intensely at the chipped paint on our kitchen counter. "And this time it's serious." "Serious how?" I asked, already bracing myself. Last time, Mrs. Holland had spent 45 minutes explaining the proper way to select an olive oil, pointedly ignoring the fact that I was the one who'd cooked the dinner. Sarah twisted the simple silver band on her finger. "Dad is looking to acquire a struggling tech startup. He needs to see that I've made sensible choices. He sees you as a hobbyist, Mark, a bright, well-meaning boy playing at being a professional." I felt the familiar prickle of indignation. I had 3 patents pending. I built bespoke cybersecurity solutions. "I am a professional, Sarah." "I know that, honey, but they don't. They need to see stability. And right now, our stability looks like a luxury they can't afford for their daughter." She took a deep breath, her eyes wide and pleading. "So I have a proposition, a drastic one." I leaned against the counter, suddenly dreading the next words. "Go on." "We fake it. We pretend we're struggling, really struggling, like ramen for every meal struggling." I blinked. "You want me to lie to your parents? Why on earth would we do that?" "Because," she leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if they think we're poor, Dad will try to save us. He'll offer you a ridiculous low-paying consulting gig at his firm just to keep me out of poverty. And that, Mark, is our ticket in. If you take that job, he'll finally see you as someone he can control, someone he can manage. He'll respect the hustle, even if it's under his thumb. And once you're in, you use that access. You impress his top analysts. You use the company's resources." The logic was twisted, bordering on insane, but there was a sharp, desperate brilliance to it. It was a Trojan horse strategy. "So I become his well-paid pet project?" I asked, running a hand through my already messy hair. "For 6 months, maybe a year, then you blow him away, get the massive promotion, and prove him wrong in the grandest way possible. But first, we need to sell the poverty. No new clothes, no expensive takeout. The apartment needs to look pathetic." I looked around our apartment, suddenly seeing it through the Hollands' eyes. The IKEA furniture, the secondhand TV, the takeout menus taped to the fridge. Maybe it wasn't a huge leap. "And what about the bills?" I asked. "We can't just stop paying the mortgage." "That's the genius part," she said, a fierce glint in her eye. "We empty our savings account. We make it look like we're living paycheck to paycheck, maybe even dipping into debt. We need them to genuinely pity us." It felt dirty, demeaning, but the idea of finally earning Mr. Holland's grudging respect, or, better yet, earning the access to dismantle his perception of me, was strangely compelling. "Okay," I agreed slowly. "We sell the struggle. But if he tries to lecture me on my life choices, I'm taking back the fancy olive oil argument." Sarah threw her arms around my neck, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Mark. This is going to work. Just remember, we are drowning." The following week was grueling. We sold my spare monitor, switched our phone plan to the cheapest possible prepaid cards, and I even started wearing the same slightly stained sweater every day. We ate canned beans 3 nights in a row. When the black Mercedes S-Class finally pulled up the next Friday, I was sitting on the floor trying to fix a leaky faucet with duct tape, wearing clothes that genuinely looked like I'd slept in them. Sarah, looking impeccably tailored in a simple, elegant dress. She insisted on maintaining her own standards, so they don't suspect anything, opened the door. Mr. Holland stepped in first, his expensive cologne immediately overpowering the scent of desperation I'd carefully cultivated. He took one look at the stack of unopened junk mail on the counter and raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Sarah, darling," he boomed, his voice echoing in our small living room. "The transition seems severe. Are you sure this adventure is still profitable?" Before Sarah could smoothly interject, I stood up, wiping greasy hands on my already filthy jeans, forcing a look of weary defeat onto my face. "It's fine, Mr. Holland. We manage. We're making do." Mrs. Holland, whose expression never changed from polite disdain, gasped softly as her eyes landed on the single, flickering lamp we were using. We'd supposedly sold the main overhead fixture. "Mark," Mr. Holland said, his tone softening just enough to be sickening, "you look tired. Come, sit. Tell me, what exactly is the market rate for a hobbyist coder in this economy?" This was it. The opening salvo. I opened my mouth, ready to spin the tale of my failing side projects and my desperate need for stable employment, when the apartment buzzer screamed, a harsh, grating sound that cut through the awkward silence. Sarah froze, her face suddenly draining of color. "Who is that?" she whispered, looking wildly between me and her parents. I frowned. I hadn't told anyone we were having guests. "I have no idea. I thought the maintenance guy was done for the week." Mr. Holland frowned, reaching into his suit jacket pocket for his phone, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "It sounds like a delivery. Perhaps you ordered something expensive, Mark? A gourmet meal to stave off the beans?" I walked to the intercom, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. I pressed the talk button, steeling myself to bark at some pizza delivery driver to leave. "Yes," I managed, my voice rough. There was a crackle of static, and then a voice, deep, heavily accented, and utterly unfamiliar, spoke through the speaker. "This is Agent Volkov. I believe Mr. Mark Jensen is expecting me. I am here regarding the transfer of assets from the Cyprus account. We have the documentation ready for immediate signature." The name Agent Volkov hung in the stale air of our apartment like a live grenade. Cyprus? Assets? The only accounts I managed were my checking account, which was currently being emptied to fund this charade, and a savings account dedicated solely to emergency dental work. Mr. Holland, who had been mid-sip of the lukewarm tap water Sarah had nervously offered him, froze, the plastic cup halfway to his lips. Mrs. Holland actually managed to look shocked for the first time in 2 decades. Sarah looked like she'd swallowed glass. "Mark," she hissed, grabbing my arm so tightly I could feel the pressure of her nails through my old sweater. "Who is that?" I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. This wasn't part of the script. The script involved ramen, job interviews, and Mr. Holland's condescending pity. It did not involve international finance agents named Volkov. I don't know any Agent Volkov," I stammered, my eyes darting wildly from Sarah to her parents. I leaned back toward the intercom, my own voice barely a squeak. "There must be a mistake. Wrong apartment." The voice from the speaker, however, was perfectly calm, utterly unperturbed by my denial. "Mr. Jensen, we are on the 3rd floor, apartment 3B. The paperwork relates to the acquisition of the shell corporation, Starlight Holdings. Your instructions were very clear. Finalize before the market opens on Monday. We have a limited window." Starlight Holdings? I hadn't acquired a goldfish in 5 years, let alone a shell corporation in Cyprus. The only thing I'd acquired recently was a stubborn case of the flu. Mr. Holland, however, was no longer looking at me with pity. His eyes were sharp, predatory, locked onto mine with an intensity I'd never witnessed. He set the plastic cup down with unnerving precision. "Starlight Holdings," he murmured, almost to himself. He pulled out his phone, but instead of dialing, he was rapidly typing something into a secure-looking application. A rather opaque holding structure, known for high-risk, untraceable transfers, used primarily in less-than-legitimate scenarios. Mrs. Holland, forgetting her previous disdain for the apartment's poverty aesthetic, clutched her expensive handbag to her chest. "Robert, what is happening?" Sarah was pulling at my sleeve again, her breathing shallow. Mark, tell them you don't know. Tell them it's a prank. But I couldn't speak. The buzzing silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the faint, relentless buzz of the intercom. I realized with a horrifying clarity that I hadn't just lied to my in-laws about being poor. I had somehow, accidentally, stepped into a massive, ongoing deception that had nothing to do with me. Or did it? I looked down at my greasy hands, then back at the intercom. If I denied it too strongly, they might leave. If I admitted to something I didn't understand, I was instantly implicated in, well, whatever Starlight Holdings was. I took a slow breath. The fear was cold, but a tiny, unwelcome spark of curiosity ignited. Who had set this up? Had Sarah, in her desperation to pull me into her father's orbit, accidentally stumbled into something far bigger? Or was this somehow my secret life bleeding through? I hadn't been sleeping well lately, prone to strange, vivid dreams about encrypted files and offshore banking. I decided to play dumb, hoping the real culprit would take the bait. I pressed the button again. "Agent Volkov," I said, forcing a tone of confused annoyance. "You have the wrong guy. I think you mean the guy in 3A. I'm just a programmer." There was a low, heavy chuckle from the speaker. "Mr. Jensen, don't insult my intelligence or yours. The transfer requires your biometrics for final release. The funds are substantial. Move out of the way of the door. I'm coming up." Before I could process the meaning of biometrics, the sound of heavy, measured footsteps began ascending the outside stairwell, climbing toward our door with unnerving speed. They weren't just climbing. They sounded like they were marching. Mr. Holland was instantly on his feet, abandoning his lukewarm water. He was no longer condescending. He was coiled, dangerous, his eyes scanning our meager living room as if searching for hidden exits or weapons. "Sarah, get behind me," he ordered, his voice losing all traces of casual wealth and taking on the clipped authority of a man used to giving non-negotiable commands. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Mark, who is Starlight Holdings, and what assets are you expecting to transfer?" The footsteps stopped directly outside our door. There was a brief, solid knock, not a polite rap, but a demand for entry. I looked at Sarah, whose face was pale with terror, and then at Mr. Holland, who was now standing between me and his daughter, facing the door like a bodyguard. I had no idea what was about to walk through that door, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever poverty performance I had prepared was now about to be violently overshadowed by a reality far more dangerous. Then the door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately, from the outside, without waiting for an invitation. The turning of the handle was agonizingly slow, each metallic click amplifying the terror in the room. Mr. Holland shoved Sarah further behind him, positioning himself square against the worn wood of the door frame. His hand disappeared into his inner suit jacket pocket, not reaching for a phone this time, but for something hard and metallic I couldn't quite identify. "If you are not the designated courier, you will retreat immediately," Holland called out, his voice resonating with the unexpected authority of a man who clearly still commanded armies, even in retirement. "This is a private residence." The lock clicked open from the outside. The figure on the other side didn't pause. The door swung inward with such force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the cheap picture frame hanging crookedly above the sofa. Standing in the doorway wasn't a slick, suited courier. It was a man built like a concrete pillar, wearing a dark, practical, tactical vest over a nondescript gray shirt. His eyes, small and focused, swept the room in a single, terrifying appraisal, lingering for a fraction of a second on Sarah, then on Holland, before settling like lasers onto me. This was no delivery boy. This was an operative. "Mr. Jensen," Agent Volkov, for it had to be him, said, his accent thick, his expression utterly devoid of warmth. He didn't step fully inside. He just filled the threshold. He ignored Mr. Holland completely, treating him as an irrelevant piece of furniture. "I am not Mr. Jensen," I managed, trying to project the confidence of the man I was supposed to be, the successful engineer, rather than the terrified fraud I currently was. Volkov didn't even blink. He reached inside his vest and slowly pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio, flipping it open without looking down. "Mark Arthur Jensen," Volkov stated, his voice gaining a low, resonant volume that vibrated in my chest. "Born October 12th, 1988. Graduate of MIT, specializing in applied cryptography. Current employment, self-employed cybersecurity consultant. Current alias for financial protection, Mark Arthur. Poor recent college graduate struggling to pay rent." He glanced at the duct-taped faucet. "A convincing effort, I'll grant you. The ramen was a nice touch." My blood turned to ice. He knew everything, not just the lie about poverty, but my actual, legitimate credentials. This wasn't about my fake struggles. This was about my real life suddenly intersecting with something catastrophic. Mr. Holland, momentarily stunned by the operative's direct dismissal of him, finally stepped forward, pulling out a small, dark object from his pocket. It looked dangerously like a snub-nosed revolver. "Step away from my son-in-law," Holland commanded, his voice tight with adrenaline. "I don't know who you are, but this ends now." Volkov didn't react to the gun. He looked past Holland directly at me and held up the portfolio. Inside, there wasn't a contract, but a single sheet of paper bearing a complex series of symbols and flowcharts, a diagram I recognized instantly, with a gut-wrenching lurch. It was the architecture for Project Chimera. Project Chimera was the reason I'd taken the job at OmniSec 5 years ago. It was a black-budget, decentralized data harvesting program I was hired to secure, or so I thought. It was supposed to be impenetrable. It was supposed to be dormant. "Chimera is not dormant, Mr. Jensen," Volkov continued, reading my reaction perfectly. "It's active, and it's being sold. You wrote the encryption key, Mark. You created the back door. We need you to sign off on the transfer of ownership to the designated principals, the actual owners of Starlight Holdings, before the market opens. You have 10 minutes to cooperate, or we take you, and everyone in this room who is privy to your little performance becomes collateral." Mr. Holland's hand tightened around the weapon, but he was hesitating. He was a financier, not a field operative. He understood leverage, but he didn't understand immediate, lethal threat the way this man did. Sarah broke away from her father, stumbling toward me, her face etched with pure panic. "Mark, what is he talking about? What key? What are you involved in?" I looked at the diagram of Chimera. I had built a lock that I thought was unbreakable. If Volkov was telling the truth, I hadn't just built a lock, I had built a keyhole for someone else's profit. And now my father-in-law was pointing a gun at a trained paramilitary operative because he thought I was poor, while the actual danger, my secret past, was standing in my doorway. I had to buy time. I had to know who the actual owners were. And I had to figure out if this whole terrifying scenario was a bizarre, coincidental nightmare, or if Sarah's desperate plan to impress her father had somehow triggered a ghost from my corporate past. "Fine," I said, raising my hands slowly, stepping around the frozen figure of Mr. Holland. "I'll sign. But I need to see the full transfer manifest, and I need to verify the decryption sequence on the transfer protocol. It's complex. I won't sign blind." Volkov's grim expression finally shifted, a fraction of an inch, perhaps the slightest concession. He held the portfolio out toward me. "The manifest is on page 4. The decryption sequence is embedded in the header of the transfer ledger," Volkov stated. "But you won't need long to verify it, Mr. Jensen, because your time is up." Volkov wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were fixed over my shoulder, past Sarah toward the small, grimy window overlooking the alleyway behind our building. A sound reached us then, cutting through the heavy silence. A high-pitched, whining drone, growing rapidly louder, a sound that was absolutely not the noise of the city. It was mechanical, rhythmic, and getting closer with terrifying speed. Volkov shoved the portfolio hard into my chest, forcing me to grab it. "They found us faster than expected. The counterparty knows you hesitated. Get ready, Mark. We might have to leave through the roof." I looked wildly around our tiny apartment, realizing the impossibility of escape, just as the distinct, heavy thump, thump, thump of rotor blades descended, so loud it felt like the building itself was shaking apart, signaling that someone else, perhaps the real owners of Starlight Holdings, was arriving to claim their assets, and they weren't sending a polite agent to ring the bell. The sound of the helicopter blades was deafening, a visceral, overwhelming roar that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled every piece of cheap furniture in our apartment. It was too close, too low. It wasn't just passing by. It was hovering directly outside, presumably over the small, flat section of roof above the derelict laundromat next door. Mr. Holland, suddenly galvanized by the direct threat to his immediate survival and perhaps the sanctity of his expensive tailoring, finally reacted. He spun around, leveling the small revolver not at Volkov but toward the window. "Get down," he roared, finally understanding the gravity of the situation, not as a potential debtor but as a target. Sarah screamed, a sharp, piercing sound of pure terror, and dove behind the sofa. Volkov, remarkably composed, didn't duck. He seized my arm, his grip like steel, pulling me toward the center of the room, away from the immediate danger of the window. "The roof access hatch is too slow. We go out the fire escape. Now!" Volkov barked, his voice somehow cutting through the thunder of the rotors. He didn't look like a man who believed in fire escapes. He looked like a man who believed in armored vehicles. I clutched the Chimera portfolio to my chest. This was my life now, a panicked scramble dictated by an operative who knew my darkest secrets, while my unsuspecting in-laws watched the entire spectacle unfold. "But the money? The transfer?" I managed to shout over the noise. "The money is irrelevant if you're dead," Volkov retorted, already yanking open the door to the tiny utility closet where we kept the vacuum cleaner and the iron. Inside was a flimsy metal ladder leading to a small square hatch that opened onto the exterior fire escape landing. Mr. Holland, realizing the immediate aerial threat was more pressing than his domestic authority, lowered the gun slightly, his eyes wide with confusion and sheer bewilderment. He was facing the man who knew his son-in-law was a fraud, only to discover the fraud was apparently a person of massive international interest. "Robert, move!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the closet entrance. We tumbled into the cramped space. Volkov kicked the interior hatch upward with brutal efficiency. A blast of cold, noisy air rushed in. As I scrambled up the ladder, forcing my legs to move despite the paralysis of terror, I glanced back. Holland was standing hesitantly in the doorway, holding the gun, looking between the operative and the infernal noise outside. "Mr. Holland, you need to get out of here," I yelled up at him. Volkov was already halfway up the ladder, pulling himself onto the rusty platform of the fire escape landing. He looked back down, catching Holland's eye. "Stay put, Mr. Holland," Volkov commanded, his voice lower now, almost a threat disguised as advice. "If you climb out there, you become a necessary liability. If you stay inside, you are merely an unfortunate witness. Choose wisely." Holland hesitated for one agonizing second, looking at the opulent world he stood to lose, the comfortable illusion of control he always maintained, and then at the sheer, terrifying reality descending from the sky. He made his choice. He slammed the utility closet door shut, plunging us into sudden, slightly muted darkness, just as the first heavy boots landed on the roof above us. Volkov didn't wait for the sound of the lock engaging upstairs. He scrambled out onto the fire escape platform. The helicopter, now directly overhead, illuminated the landing in rhythmic flashes of blinding white light. "We move fast," Volkov ordered, gesturing down the rickety metal stairs. "They'll expect us to run down. We're going to move to the alley, then cut across to the utility tunnel entrance 3 blocks east. Do you remember the tunnel schematics you designed for the city renewal project 2 years ago, Mark?" I nodded mutely, still clutching the Chimera portfolio. Of course, I remembered. I designed the schematics for the city's defunct steam tunnels, mapping out access points under the pretense of environmental impact surveys, another ghost from my real past surfacing. We hit the first flight of stairs, metal groaning under our weight. The footsteps on the roof were now multiple, heavy and coordinated. They weren't sending one man down. They were deploying a full team. As we reached the second-floor landing, Volkov stopped dead, pressing himself and me against the brick wall. He held up a single finger to signal silence, his weapon now drawn, a sleek, silenced pistol, and pointed toward the alley below us. "Wait," he whispered, his voice tense. "There's someone waiting down there, too." Through the gaps in the metal grating, I could see the alley, now bathed in the harsh, pulsing spotlights of the hovering aircraft. And standing near the mouth of the alley, waiting patiently by a nondescript black van, wasn't an operative from Volkov's side, nor a clear threat from the Chimera owners. It was a woman. She was tall, impeccably dressed in an expensive, dark trench coat that billowed slightly in the rotor wash. She wasn't looking up at the helicopter. She was looking directly at the fire escape, straight at us. And in her hand she held a sophisticated-looking, directional satellite phone, pointed precisely at the metal landing where we were hiding. As the spotlight hit her face, I recognized her. She was the lead analyst from OmniSec, the woman who had overseen my security clearance for Project Chimera. A woman I had barely spoken to, who had always seemed coldly professional, yet utterly detached. She raised the satellite phone to her ear, and as she did, she tilted her head back, her lips barely moving, yet I could hear her over the helicopter noise, clear as a bell, as if she were whispering directly into my ear. "Hello, Mark," she said, a smile finally cracking her professional composure, a smile that promised absolute destruction. "Did you really think selling the key meant giving up the lock?" The sound of the OmniSec analyst's voice, Sarah's former colleague, Evelyn Reed, was the final sickening realization. This wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't Volkov's operation I'd stumbled into. It was a calculated trap, and I was the bait. Volkov wasn't here to save me. He was here to retrieve the asset, me, before the real party, Evelyn, could intercept. Evelyn Reed was the true architect. She hadn't been working for the buyers. She was working against Volkov's faction, using my supposed financial ruin as the perfect cover to draw out the data I'd secured. "She's the counterparty," Volkov breathed, his grip tightening on my shoulder. His composure finally cracked, replaced by furious urgency. "She's clean. She's cutting us out." The thumping rhythm of the helicopter above us suddenly changed. Instead of the steady beat of reconnaissance, the sound became erratic, aggressive. They were preparing to deploy. "The tunnel!" I yelled, adrenaline overriding the fear. She knows the schematics because I gave them to her when I was preparing the security audit for the city project. She must have been tracking my communications. I thrust the Chimera portfolio at Volkov. "The transfer isn't authorized by me. It's a spoof. The real key sequence is embedded in the metadata of the executive summary on page 1, disguised as a software bug report. If you upload that file now, it won't transfer the assets. It will trigger a level 5 system wipe across every server connected to Chimera." Volkov stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. If I was telling the truth, I had just handed him the nuclear option. Not to transfer power, but to destroy the entire operation, including the data Volkov's own organization was trying to secure. "You're willing to burn it all?" Volkov demanded. "I'm willing to burn her operation," I spat, realizing the true scale of Evelyn's betrayal. She had set up Volkov's people, and she had orchestrated the setup with my in-laws. If she gets Chimera, she controls the world's digital back doors. If I wipe it, she gets nothing but dust. Below us, Evelyn tilted her head again, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She clearly sensed the shift in dynamic. She raised her phone again, this time seemingly dialing an external number. Volkov didn't hesitate. He looked from Evelyn to the portfolio in my hand, made a split-second decision, and yanked my arm again, pulling me back toward the hatch. "We get inside and upload it now," Volkov commanded, shoving me back down the fire escape ladder toward the utility closet. "If you can initiate the wipe from a secure terminal, she loses all leverage." We tumbled back into the cramped closet. The helicopter blades shrieked directly overhead as the first ropes, weighted with climbing harnesses, began descending toward the roof access point. We had seconds before Evelyn's team stormed the roof and cut off our exit entirely. Volkov wrestled the hatch shut. The impact was immediately felt as heavy boots landed directly above us, shaking the tiny space violently. "The modem in your office! Where is it?" Volkov hissed, scanning the closet wildly. "In the floorboard, under the rug." I grabbed the edge of the worn rug, ripping it aside to reveal the loose plank. I'd installed a hidden high-speed fiber optic connection months ago, ostensibly for stress testing, but really just for my own peace of mind. A line Volkov's side couldn't trace yet. I pried the board open, revealing a hardened external modem hooked up to a battery pack. Volkov snatched a ruggedized tablet from his vest and jammed a fiber cable into the modem port. "Upload the file, Mark, now." My hands, still shaking from the adrenaline and the fear of Mr. Holland's revolver downstairs, flew across the tablet's screen. I bypassed the standard interface, diving straight into the command line, pulling up the executive summary file I had hidden inside the portfolio. I initiated the forced upload sequence, targeting the Chimera Core network. Outside the utility closet door, Mr. Holland must have heard the commotion. The door handle rattled again, frantically this time. "Robert, stop! Robert, they're armed!" Sarah's panicked voice screamed from the living room. Just as the progress bar on the tablet hit 98%, the utility closet door burst inward. It wasn't Volkov's operatives, nor was it Evelyn Reed. Standing there, panting, covered in dust, holding the small revolver steady in a white-knuckled grip, was Mr. Holland. He wasn't aiming at Volkov. He was aiming directly at me. "I don't know what conspiracy you've dragged my daughter into, Mark," Holland gasped, his face a mask of betrayal and fury. "But I saw that man downstairs. I saw the look on his face when he called you Mr. Jensen. I don't care if you're poor or rich or a spy. You lied to me. You will not bring this filth into my daughter's life." The tablet chirped an electronic confirmation tone. Upload complete. The system wipe was initiated. Chimera was gone. In that split second, with Volkov staring at the confirmation, me staring at the gun, and the sound of helicopters breaking through the roof above, Mr. Holland's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening in the small space. But it wasn't aimed at me. The bullet struck the tablet in Volkov's hand, smashing the screen into fragments. Volkov roared in frustration, dropping the ruined device. He didn't even look at Holland. He looked at me, realization dawning in his eyes. "You wiped it, but you didn't secure the hard evidence. The physical transfer logs are still on that portfolio. Where is it?" I looked down. The leather-bound portfolio, the one containing the crucial paper trail linking Evelyn Reed to the entire operation, the proof that exonerated me and damned her, was gone. It wasn't on the floor. It wasn't in my hand. It was sitting on the top step of the fire escape ladder, the one place I had dropped it in the chaos, right where Evelyn Reed's operatives would have accessed it first. And as the sound of breaking glass echoed from the roof, I saw a slender, gloved hand reach down from the shadows above the hatch and smoothly retrieve the dark leather book. Evelyn Reed had won the first round. She had destroyed the assets, neutralized Volkov's leverage, and now possessed the only physical evidence linking her to the scheme. My past wasn't just catching up to me. It was walking away with the receipts, leaving me trapped in a dusty closet with a gun-wielding, furious father-in-law and a dangerous operative who had just lost his entire mission because of my choice.